Hi, Scott from AJ Aircraft back again for the 93 Laser 230Z build video. So let's get started.
Okay, we're going to take a close look at all of this. So we'll start with the canopy here. And you want to look it over, make sure it's not warped, broke, cracked, anything like that. Thoroughly inspect the fuselage. You want to look, make sure everything's intact, nothing's warped from the packaging. Make sure the rudder and all the stabs and everything's are nice and straight, coverings in order. You want to do all this stuff prior to assembling the plane to make sure you don't find something halfway through. Make sure you check the cowl ring on the cowl, make sure that's in right, that it's even on all sides, like at the top and the bottom, that is even distance. 3/16 or 1/4 of an inch usually is what they set them at. Make sure you check the wheel pants. Nothing's cracked or broke. Same thing with the stabs. And you just want to go over everything. Make sure that the proper hinges are properly installed from the factory, that nothing is warped or odd looking. And it's just important to go over the plane up front as you're building it. And same here with the other stab. Make sure nothing's broken or has been broken from the shipping process or anything like that. So here's the landing gear. Just inspect the landing gear. It's carbon, doesn't break. They don't ever usually get broke. But here you'll see I'm going to go ahead and use thin CA in this little long dropper tube. And I'm going to go over, first things first, I'm going to go over every joint that I can physically see and get a glue dropper on. So I'm just going to go through, and this nice table stand allows me to tilt it so the glue runs the right direction. And I'm just going to go through here and get all these glue joints. I'll speed this up because you don't want to see it all, but I'm just going to go through, and it's sort of painstaking, but it really helps in the long run. Vibrations and all different kinds of things that your airframe will endure. So just make sure you get all the joints. Thin CA is really the only thing you want to use on this because it'll wick down into those factory joints and really help shore up that fuselage, make it nice and rigid. So we'll just get through this here. Okay, now we're going to do the covering. You just want to make sure that you get your iron at a pretty good temperature to get all the wrinkles out and iron down the whole fuselage. Sort of a tedious process. I put my iron on 3 and I'll sort of rush through it here. You can also use your monokote gun to make sure that all the wrinkles are out. This is a really important step. Don't skip this step. Getting all the covering tight, getting it all nice, well, it makes for a good presentation at the field, and it also increases performance on your airplane, making sure all the surfaces are tight, all the loose ends are ironed down, all the tips of everything's ironed down. You can also put little clear monokote over the tips if you want. Here I'm just going to cut out the cutouts. I use a flashlight sometimes just so it's hard to see, so you're not guessing at where you're going to insert your knife, hobby knife or hot knife. Or as you can see, I use a soldering iron to get these out. This works really good. I just get an old tip on my soldering iron and I turn it up as high as it'll go, and I just roll right around that opening, and it just cuts it right out, and it also sort of seals the edges. So, and you can see I'll cut all these holes out, and then I'll use an iron to iron them all down. And that's pretty much it for covering. You just want to make sure everything's tight and presentable. All right, so now we're going to move on to the landing gear. Here you can see what comes in the kits, and we'll get started. Here you can see I got a piece of blue tape on the front of the leading edge of the landing gear. There's an airfoil on that landing gear, so it's bigger up front. So you just want to make sure you get it on right. Don't put it on backwards. There's the your bolt, so you want to make sure you have a washer on it. Also, you're going to use an 11/32 wrench. Works really good with the nuts that are provided in the kit. And you're just going to go ahead and get this tight. You don't want to use any Loctite or anything on here. Those are nylock nuts. They'll be sufficient to keep in your landing gear on tight. Here's what it looks like inside the fuselage. You can see that little angle, aluminum angle iron is what your little sandwich the landing gear on there, so it's pretty secure. Here you'll put your landing gear block on. Fit that in. Multiple ways to do this. A lot of people like to use welder's glue and different things to put that on. I'll show you that in 1 minute, but first we're going to put these landing gear cuffs on, and you'll see the holes. They should line up right with the, here's the bolt or the screw supplied in the kit. And now that carbon is sort of can be tight. You want to work that back and forth, because what you don't want to do is, if you really reef on these screws, you can break them in the carbon and have to dig them out. So just be careful, run them in a little, take them out. Here's that landing gear block I was talking about. We're going to go ahead and I like to use just a strip of covering to hold them on. It's how I do all my models. It works really well. It's nice and clean. And if you ever have to take them off, if you ever have to take that landing gear block off, you're never digging it out of there. And I just use an iron. I just iron it right down, and it works perfect. It keeps it on. And you do a strip in the back and a strip in the front here, and you can barely even tell that there was even a landing gear block on there. So it looks pretty good. Just do a little trimming here. Just get this all trimmed up, and works really nice. So if you haven't done that or tried it, and give it a try, it works really well. So now we're going to put the axles on. You can see here there's an axle supplied in the kit and a nylock nut. No need for Loctite or anything of that here. So we're just going to screw this on. I use a crescent wrench and 7/16, I believe, to just get this screwed down nice and tight. So now when we come to putting on the wheel pants, you're going to use two wheel collars, one on the inside of the wheel, one on the outside of the wheel. So basically what I like to do is just get the wheel on there, get the wheel pant sort of in place, and you want to center this wheel in the wheel pant. So I just push that wheel collar over and then carefully pull off the wheel pant, and then I'm just gonna tighten this wheel collar. Just for, at this point, just for setup, just checking it, making sure we get it right. The other thing you want to keep in mind is when you actually use the 440 nuts to bolt you always definitely want to use Loctite on the wheel collar. You don't want your wheel collar falling off. But when you bolt the wheel pan on, it's going to pull it towards the landing gear. So you want to sort of maybe give yourself a 1/16 of an inch or so, so you don't go through this process and then bolt the wheel pan on and it rubs on the inside. So just pay attention to that as you're bolting the wheels on here. Now we're just excuse me, we're just going to do that for setup purposes, and we'll get the wheel pant fitted and bolted on, and then you want to make sure nothing rubs, because the last thing you want is wheel pants rubbing. So here's that 440 nut. You definitely, or bolt, I'm sorry, and washer. You definitely want to use Loctite on this. You don't want your wheel pants falling off in the air. But again, right now I'm just sort of fitting and making sure that once the wheel pant is screwed down tight, that we have no rubbing or anything. That way I know my wheel collars are in place. I'm using, I would make sure you use Loctite on it. You can see how it pulls it, it sucks it in towards the landing gear there. You want to give yourself room for that when you're setting up the wheel collars. And there you want no rubbing or anything. You want to make sure that that's right perfectly centered in there. And again, you want to make sure these are nice and tight. Use the blue Loctite, medium Loctite on them, and you get that set.
Okay, when doing the tail wheel, I like to disassemble everything, as you can see, and then just reassemble it with Loctite. None of that stuff's Loctited from the factory, so I like to just go back through the whole tail wheel assembly, making sure everything's nice and snug and Loctited properly. So again, you know, that nagging tail gear that comes loose or pieces are falling off of it, this is a good time to make sure that none of that happens. So here I'm just taking all the wheel collars and just taking the screws out of them, and again Loctite and everything to make sure that that's tight. And I'll put, this is the wheel assembly that holds the wheel, sort of that, put that on there. And then here, sort of important, when you're, I like to put a little bit of grease in there just to make sure that you don't get any of that squeaking or any nagging noise coming from your tail wheel. Just use a little bit of lithium grease there. Once you get that pushed through, just push some of that out of there. I like to just make sure it's greased up good. Not a big deal, but just one of those things that makes your model sound nice. Now you'll see here, there's a little flat spot on that, and the flat spot goes towards the back. So there's a tiller wire that, again, there's all these set screws in there as well, but we're going to make sure those are all Loctited, and then we're going to take that tiller wire that goes out into your rudder, and it actually steers the rear wheel. We're going to make sure that that hole, when you assemble this, that hole is facing towards the rear. And you're going to want to make sure that you lock down the lock nut on the flat spot that you see in that axle that I just showed you a minute ago. So you can see here, there's that flat spot, and make sure that tiller wire is facing towards the back. And as I'm screwing down this set screw, I'm feeling for that flat spot. You want to make sure you get it in that flat spot. Get it nice and snug in there. You can see I'm feeling for it. Make sure you get it there. And then I'm going to make sure that both of there's two set screws. You want to make sure both of them are tight. And then here you can see a little bit of play there. So then you take the bottom wheel collar and move that up and give yourself, so that's nice and snug, no slop in there at all. It works. Then you're going to go ahead and put the tiller arm in. Make sure that you get that snugged up. Well, first you want to make sure you get Loctite on it, and then we're going to make sure we get that snugged up nice and tight as well, because that wire is actually the wire that goes through the rudder link and actually steers your tail wheel. So make sure you get that tight. Make sure no binding or everything's working free. Then same thing here with the wheel collars for the wheel. Now with the tail wheel, you just want to make sure you get the tail wheel in the center of the assembly. So you don't want it off to one side, the right or the left. You want it perfectly centered on that tiller wire. That'll give you the most positive steering that you can get out of your model. So you see here, we'll just finish this up here, and then we'll go to actually mounting the landing gear. Again, a little bit of grease on the wheel, keep anything from squeaking. Don't need a lot. You don't want to take the cap off there. You don't want to collect a bunch of dirt or debris or anything. Just a little bit of grease to make sure that that rolls nice and smooth for you. So here you can see that I'm just making sure that that tail wheel is nice and aligned in the middle of that tiller wire. Just double check that. And see how it's aligned there. It looks like it's got to go just a little bit over to the right still. And then this will make sure that your tail gear or your tail assembly is all Loctited, it's all tight, and nothing comes apart vibration wise, or nothing happens while you're flying. Take the time to do this. A lot of people don't do this step. They just go ahead and bolt the landing gear on, or the tail wheel assembly on. Now we'll go ahead and bolt it onto the plane.
Okay, we'll just finish locking this down here and making sure that everything rolls freely and that you got these set screws nice and tight. Everything's aligned up, tiller wires lined up with the wheel. Now your landing gear is all set to go. So we'll go ahead and bolt that on the plane now. It's a pretty simple process, just 3 bolts. Obviously you're going to use medium Loctite here, blue. And the order is your washer, as you can see here, and the bolt. And you're going to have 3 of them. You're just going to apply a little bit of thread locker and just bolt this on. Some people don't bolt it on yet. That's optional. You can bolt the tail wheel on now if you like. If you have a different process, that's fine as well too. So we'll make sure these 3 bolts are snug, and then we'll move on to build video number 2.
Okay, so you can find video number 2 at ajaircraft.com YouTube channel. Please take the time to subscribe to our channel and like these videos. Thank you.